They never had a childhood. While other kids played with toys, they played the role of adults. And now, decades later, their body grew up, but a part of them is still that terrified child, pretending to be okay. This is the hidden psychology of children who grew up too fast, and what it does to the adult they become. There's a specific kind of silence that haunts people who grew up too fast. It's not the comfortable silence of peace, it's the eerie quiet of a childhood that never existed. A space where laughter should have echoed, where mistakes should have been forgiven, where innocence should have been protected. But instead, there was only survival. Today, we're diving deep into the dark psychology of premature maturity, a phenomenon that creates some of the most high-functioning yet internally fractured adults you'll ever meet. These are the people who seem to have it all together on the surface, but beneath that polished exterior lies a psychological landscape riddled with compensatory mechanisms, hypervigilance, and a relentless inner emptiness that no achievement can fill. The psychological theft of childhood. When a child is forced to grow up too fast, whether through parentification, trauma, poverty, illness, or family dysfunction, something profound happens in their psychological development. The prefrontal cortex, which should be developing through play and exploration, instead becomes prematurely wired for threat detection and adult responsibility. This isn't normal development. This is adaptation to abnormality. The child learns to read rooms before they can read books. They master emotional regulation of adults before they understand their own feelings. They become fluent in the language of crisis management while their peers are still learning basic vocabulary. And here's the darkest part. They become exceptional at it. They become the reliable one, the responsible one, the one everyone turns to. But excellence built on childhood trauma is a house constructed on a foundation of sand. The hypervigilance that never turns off. Fast forward to adulthood, that child is now 30, 40, 50 years old, outwardly successful, capable, competent, but internally, they're still that 8-year-old scanning the environment for danger, anticipating needs before they're spoken, managing everyone's emotions except their own. This is hypervigilance, a state of constant alertness that once was necessary for survival, but now sabotages peace. Their nervous system never learned the difference between genuine threat and normal life circumstances. A delayed text message triggers the same cortisol response as actual abandonment once did. A minor conflict activates the same fight or flight mechanism that was needed when home wasn't safe. They can't relax because relaxation was never safe. Rest feels like negligence. Vulnerability feels like a death sentence. The imposter complex and chronic overachievement. Here's where the psychology gets particularly cruel. Children who grew up too fast often become relentless overachievers, not from genuine ambition, but from a desperate need to prove their worth. Because somewhere deep in their psyche, they internalized a devastating belief: I am only valuable when I'm useful. They learned early that love was conditional on performance, affection was earned through service, attention came only when they solved someone else's problem. So they became human doing machines rather than human beings. This creates what psychologists call achievement-based identity, where their entire sense of self is wrapped up in what they produce, not who they are. Strip away the accomplishments, the responsibilities, the roles they play for others, and they experience an existential crisis. Without something to fix or someone to care for, they don't know who they are. The imposter syndrome that plagues them isn't really about doubting their competence, it's about the terror of being seen as the frightened child they still feel like inside. No matter how much they achieve, that child whispers, "You're just pretending. You're not really an adult. You're still that kid faking it." Now, let's talk about relationships, the arena where this psychology manifests most painfully. Adults who grew up too fast have a peculiar relationship pattern. They're simultaneously desperate for connection and terrified of dependency. They learned early that relying on others leads to disappointment, that asking for help is weakness, that their needs are burdens. So they enter relationships with one foot always out the door, ready to flee the moment vulnerability is required. They choose partners who need to fix them because that dynamic feels familiar. They replay the caretaker role because at least they know how to do that. Genuine reciprocity, where they receive as much as they give, feels foreign, uncomfortable, even threatening. Because if they're not needed, what's keeping the other person around? This creates a tragic irony. The very intimacy they crave is sabotaged by the defense mechanisms that once kept them alive. The grief that has no name. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this psychology is the complicated grief these individuals carry. They mourned a childhood they never had, but that grief has nowhere to go because it's not about something that happened, it's about something that didn't happen. There's no funeral for lost innocence, no memorial service for stolen play, no sympathy card for the child who had to become their own parent. Society often praises these individuals. You're so mature for your age. You're so responsible. I don't know how you do it all. But behind those compliments is a child screaming, I didn't want to be mature. I wanted to be a kid. This unprocessed grief manifests as chronic emptiness, persistent dissatisfaction, or a haunting feeling that something is fundamentally wrong even when everything appears right. It's the psychological residue of a childhood sacrificed at the altar of survival. But here's what needs to be said. Recognizing this pattern is the first step towards healing. Understanding that your hyper-responsibility is a trauma response, not a personality trait, is revolutionary. Realizing that you don't have to earn love, that rest isn't selfish, that your worth isn't contingent on your usefulness, this is revolutionary. The child who grew up too fast can't get those years back, but the adult they became can finally give that child what they never received: permission to be imperfect, to need help, to rest without guilt, to exist without earning it. Healing doesn't erase what happened, but it does mean you're no longer controlled by it. You survived by growing up too fast. Now you get to heal by learning to be young again, not in age, but in spirit, in playfulness, in trust, in the radical act of letting yourself simply be.